A 6-year-old girl knocks on the millionaire's door. "Daddy, they want to take me to a shelter." He then froze and his life changed forever. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The October rain hammered against the massive windows of Richard Sterling's Georgian mansion like bullets against armor. At 58, Richard had grown accustomed to the sound. It matched the constant drumming of grief in his chest that hadn't stopped since Emma died 3 years ago. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the untouched glass of bourbon on the mahogany table. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with memories of a 6-year-old girl who would never grow up. Emma's paintings still hung on the refrigerator in the kitchen he never visited. Her bedroom remained exactly as she'd left it, down to the stuffed elephant on her pillow. Knock, knock, knock. Richard frowned. Nobody visited anymore. His ex-wife Catherine lived in California now, drowning her own grief in a new marriage. His business associates knew better than to show up unannounced at Sterling Manor. Knock, knock, knock. More persistent this time. Richard sighed and rose from his chair, his expensive Italian shoes echoing across the marble foyer. Through the ornate glass panels, he could make out a small figure hunched against the storm. He opened the heavy oak door, and his world stopped. A little girl stood on his doorstep, soaked to the bone. She couldn't have been older than 6, with dark curls plastered to her head and enormous brown eyes that seemed far too old for her face. She wore a thin pink dress that clung to her tiny frame, and she was shivering violently. But it wasn't her appearance that paralyzed Richard Sterling. It was what she said next. "Papai," she whispered, using a word that hit him like a physical blow. "They want to take me to the shelter. Please don't let them." Richard's hand gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Papai," Portuguese for daddy. Emma used to call him that after watching her favorite cartoon, giggling as she practiced the foreign word. I'm sorry, little one," he stammered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I think you have the wrong house." The child looked up at him with those impossibly deep eyes, and for a split second Richard saw Emma staring back at him. The same stubborn tilt of the chin, the same way of biting her lower lip when she was afraid. "My name is Lucy," she said simply. "Maman said if anything happened, I should find the man in the big house on Maple Hill. She said he would understand about losing people you love." Richard's legs nearly gave out. Catherine used to call their home exactly that, the big house on Maple Hill. But how could this stranger child know that? Behind Lucy, he caught sight of headlights cutting through the rain. A white van with children's services emblazoned on the side was pulling into his circular driveway. "Please," Lucy whispered, reaching out with a tiny hand that found his. "I don't want to go with them. Maman said you would keep me safe." Car doors slammed in the driveway. Richard heard voices calling through the storm, official voices, bureaucratic voices, voices that meant business. In 30 seconds, they would be at his door, and this mysterious little girl who somehow knew his deepest pain would disappear into the system forever. Richard Sterling had spent 3 years building walls around his heart, sworn never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. But as he looked down at Lucy's upturned face, so heartbreakingly similar to the daughter he'd lost, something inside those walls began to crack. The footsteps were getting closer. He had maybe 10 seconds to make a decision that would change everything. "Mr. Sterling," a woman's voice called from the driveway, "we need to speak with you." Richard looked down at Lucy one more time. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, the desperate need to protect someone. "Come inside," he said quickly, pulling her into the foyer. "Whatever happens next, you're safe here." But as he closed the door behind them, Richard Sterling had no idea that this moment would unravel secrets buried so deep they would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about his life, his wife, and the daughter he'd lost forever. Richard's heart hammered as he led Lucy deeper into the house, away from the persistent knocking at the door. The child's wet dress left puddles on his pristine marble floor, but for the first time in 3 years, he didn't care about the mess. "Mr. Sterling, open the door, please." The woman's voice was getting more insistent. "I'm Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. We tracked the child to your property." Lucy pressed herself against Richard's side, her small body trembling. "Please don't let them take me," she whispered. "Maman said the big houseman would understand about broken hearts." That phrase stopped Richard cold. During Emma's illness, when the 6-year-old couldn't sleep from the pain, she used to say Daddy had a broken heart, just like her broken body. How could this stranger know those exact words? The knocking became pounding. Richard made a split-second decision that surprised even him. He opened the door just wide enough to see a thin Asian woman in her 40s, clipboard in hand, rain dripping from her practical jacket. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Sarah Chen, the child who approached your home. We need to take her to temporary housing. She was found wandering in the storm after her guardian passed away this morning." "Her guardian?" Richard kept his voice steady, though his mind raced. "Maria Santos, a Brazilian woman who worked as a housekeeper downtown. No legal paperwork for custody, and the child claims she has no other family." Sarah peered past him. "Is she inside?" Richard's businessman instincts kicked in, the same ones that had built his empire from nothing. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor. This child seems distressed, and it's nearly midnight in a thunderstorm." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your concern, but we have protocols. And I have lawyers," Richard replied calmly. "Give me until morning. One night won't hurt anyone, and it might help this child process what's happened to her." Behind him, he heard Lucy's sharp intake of breath. After a tense moment, Sarah nodded. 8 a.m. sharp, Mr. Sterling. Have her ready." As the van disappeared into the rain, Richard turned to find Lucy staring at him with wonder. "You didn't give me away," she said softly. "No," he replied, surprising himself with the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "I didn't." The next morning, Richard found Lucy sitting at his kitchen island, wearing one of his old Harvard t-shirts that fell to her ankles like a dress. She was drawing with crayons he didn't remember buying, her tongue poking out in concentration exactly the way Emma used to do. "Where did those come from?" he asked, nodding at the art supplies. "The lady upstairs gave them to me," Lucy said without looking up. "She said little girls need to make beautiful things when they're sad." Richard felt ice in his veins. "What lady?" Lucy pointed toward the ceiling. "The pretty lady with yellow hair. She was in the room with all the toys." Richard's hands began to shake. Emma's room. No one had been in Emma's room since she died. He kept it locked. But when he'd checked on Lucy during the night, she'd been sleeping peacefully in the guest room downstairs. "Lucy," he said carefully, "what did this lady look like?" "Like me, but bigger. She had your eyes, Papai. She said she's been waiting for me to come home." The crayons fell from Richard's numb fingers. Emma had his eyes, the same steel grey that everyone always commented on, but this was impossible. Children had active imaginations, especially traumatized children. "Show me what you're drawing." Lucy turned the paper around. Richard's world tilted. It was a perfect recreation of Emma's bedroom, down to the specific pattern of the wallpaper, the exact placement of the stuffed animals, even the way the morning light fell across the window seat. Details Lucy couldn't possibly know. "How do you—" he began, then stopped as Lucy pointed to the corner of the drawing. There, barely visible, were 2 figures holding hands, one tall, one small. The tall figure had a beard like Richard's. The small figure wore a pink dress and had curly dark hair. "That's us, Papai," Lucy said simply. "The pretty lady said you've been alone too long. Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. Sarah Chen's number. Mr. Sterling, I have some information about Lucy Santos that I think you should know. Her mother, Maria, left a letter. It mentions you specifically. What? Richard's voice cracked. She claims Lucy is your biological daughter. There's also mention of a woman named Catherine Sterling. Sir, was your wife involved with Maria Santos? The phone slipped from Richard's hand, clattering to the floor. Lucy looked up at him with those impossibly familiar brown eyes, and suddenly Richard saw it. The shape of her nose, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Papai?" Lucy said softly. "Are you okay?" Through the window, he saw Sarah Chen's van pulling into the driveway again. But this time, she wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit was getting out of the passenger side, briefcase in hand. Lucy saw them too. She grabbed Richard's hand with surprising strength. "Please don't let them separate us again," she whispered. "I already lost Maman. I can't lose you too." Richard stared down at this little girl who might impossibly be his daughter, a daughter Catherine had hidden from him, a daughter he'd never known existed while Emma lay dying. The doorbell rang, echoing through the mansion like a judge's gavel. "Again," Richard whispered, staring at Lucy's earnest face. But before she could answer, memories crashed over him like a tsunami. 7 years ago, during Emma's treatment, Catherine had disappeared for 3 weeks. She'd claimed she needed space, needed to visit her sister in Brazil to clear her head. Richard had been too consumed with Emma's deteriorating condition to question it deeply. When Catherine returned, she'd been different, distant, guilty, jumping every time the phone rang. She'd thrown herself into Emma's care with an almost manic intensity, as if trying to atone for something. The doorbell chimed again, more insistently. "Stay here," Richard told Lucy, his mind reeling. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." He opened the door to find Sarah Chen with a man who screamed "expensive lawyer" from his Italian shoes to his perfectly knotted tie. "Mr. Sterling, this is Marcus Webb from the district attorney's office," Sarah said. "We need to discuss some serious allegations." Richard's business training kicked in. Never show weakness. Never admit anything without understanding the full scope. "What allegations?" Webb stepped forward, his expression grave. "Sir, are you aware that Maria Santos filed a paternity claim against you 3 years ago? The paperwork was sent to your wife, Catherine Sterling, who apparently intercepted and handled it privately." The words hit Richard like physical blows. "That's impossible. We have copies of the documents, Mr. Sterling. DNA evidence, a birth certificate listing you as the father, and a substantial payment made from your joint account to Maria Santos. Your wife paid her to disappear." Richard gripped the doorframe. Catherine had handled all their finances during Emma's illness. He'd been too devastated, too focused on his dying daughter to pay attention to money transfers. "There's more," Webb continued. "Maria's letter states that your wife threatened her, told her if she ever contacted you directly, she'd have her deported and Lucy placed in the foster system. Maria was undocumented, Mr. Sterling. Your wife used that against her." Behind him, Richard heard a small gasp. Lucy had crept into the hallway and was listening, her face pale with understanding beyond her years. "The question now," Sarah said gently, "is what you want to do. DNA testing will confirm the truth, but that child has been through enough trauma. She lost her mother yesterday, and she clearly sees you as family." Richard's mind flashed to Catherine's behavior during those final months with Emma. The secretive phone calls, the sudden trips to handle business, the way she'd flinch whenever he mentioned having more children after Emma was gone. His wife hadn't just hidden Lucy's existence, she'd used an innocent woman's immigration status to keep a father from his daughter. While Emma was dying, Lucy had been growing up across town, believing her father didn't want her. "Papai?" Lucy's small voice broke through his thoughts. She'd moved closer, her hand finding his. "I heard them talking. Maman always told me you didn't know about me. She said the angry lady made sure of that." Richard looked down at this brave little girl who'd somehow found her way to him through a storm, carrying secrets that would reshape his entire understanding of his marriage, his loss, and his future. Webb was waiting for an answer. Sarah had her clipboard ready. In the distance, he could hear thunder rolling across the hills, another storm approaching. But all Richard could see were Lucy's eyes, brown like her mother's, but with flecks of steel grey that were unmistakably his own. 2 hours later, Richard sat in his study with Lucy, curled up in the leather chair across from his desk, clutching the stuffed elephant from Emma's room. The resemblance between the two girls was becoming impossible to ignore. The way Lucy hummed absently while thinking, the way she tucked one foot under herself when she sat, even the way she wrinkled her nose when concentrating. Webb had left copies of documents that painted a damning picture of Catherine's deception. Bank transfers totaling $50,000. Legal papers stating that Richard Sterling acknowledged paternity but waived all rights. Catherine's signature forging his consent. "I need to make a phone call," Richard said gently. "It might get loud. Do you want to wait in Emma's room?" Lucy's eyes lit up. "Can I?" "The pretty lady said I could play with her toys." Richard's chest tightened, but he nodded. He waited until Lucy disappeared upstairs, then dialed the number he'd memorized but never called. Catherine answered on the third ring. "Richard? Why are you... Is everything all right?" Even after 3 years of separation, her voice still carried that slight tremor she got when she was nervous. She was nervous now. "Tell me about Maria Santos," he said without preamble. Silence stretched across the line like a chasm. Then, "I don't know what you mean." "Catherine, don't. I have documents, bank records. A 6-year-old girl sitting in our daughter's bedroom who has my eyes and calls me papaye." The sharp intake of breath was audible. "She found you. Did you really think she wouldn't? Her mother died, Catherine. She had nowhere else to go." Richard's voice was deadly quiet. "How could you hide this from me? How could you pay a woman to disappear with my daughter while Emma was dying? You want to know how?" Catherine's composure cracked and raw pain poured through. "Because I was watching my baby girl waste away to nothing, and I couldn't handle the thought of you having another daughter somewhere else who was healthy and whole." Richard closed his eyes. "So you punished an innocent child?" "I punished myself," Catherine screamed. "Do you think it was easy? Do you think I didn't lie awake at night wondering about her? But Emma was dying, Richard. Our baby was dying, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." "You lost me anyway," Richard said softly. "I know." Catherine's voice broke completely. "After Emma died, I kept thinking about that little girl. I wanted to tell you so many times, but then you withdrew from everything, from me, from life. How could I tell you that while we were losing our daughter, another daughter was growing up thinking her father didn't want her?" Through the phone, Richard could hear Catherine crying, deep, wrenching sobs that spoke of 3 years of guilt. "Maria kept sending pictures," Catherine whispered. "School plays, birthdays, first day of kindergarten. She wanted you to know Lucy was okay. But I was so scared, so broken. I thought if you knew about her, you'd blame me for Emma's death somehow, or you'd leave me for Maria. Instead, you left me anyway. I had to. The guilt was eating me alive." Upstairs, Richard heard Lucy's laughter echoing from Emma's room, pure and joyful in a way the house hadn't heard in years. His daughter, both of his daughters, deserved better than the choices fear had driven the adults to make. "Catherine," he said finally, "Lucy needs stability. She needs a father who won't abandon her again. Are you going to fight for custody?" Richard looked up toward the ceiling, where his surviving daughter was playing with the toys of the child he'd lost. "I'm going to fight for the chance to be the father I should have been all along." As he hung up, Richard heard something that made his blood freeze. Lucy was talking to someone upstairs, her voice bright with excitement, but according to Sarah Chen, Lucy was alone in that room. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and impossible hope. Richard reached Emma's bedroom doorway and stopped dead. Lucy sat cross-legged on the carpet, having what appeared to be an animated tea party with Emma's stuffed animals, but she was clearly responding to someone, nodding, giggling, even pausing as if listening to replies. "No, Emma, Popeye doesn't know about the secret hiding place yet," Lucy was saying to the empty chair across from her. "Should we show him?" Richard's hands gripped the doorframe so tightly the wood creaked. Lucy heard the sound and turned, her face lighting up. "Popeye, Emma wants to show you something special. She's been keeping it safe for you." Logic warred with impossible hope in Richard's chest. Children had imaginary friends, especially traumatized children processing grief, but Lucy was pointing to a specific spot near Emma's bookshelf, and Richard found himself remembering how Emma used to whisper secrets to that exact corner when she thought no one was watching. "What kind of secret?" he heard himself ask. Lucy jumped up and ran to the bookshelf, pressing her small hands against a section of molding that looked identical to the rest. With a soft click, a hidden panel swung open, revealing a small cavity Richard had never known existed. "Emma says she hid something for you before she went to the bright place," Lucy said matter-of-factly, reaching into the opening. "She was waiting for me to come help her give it to you." Richard's legs nearly gave out. Emma had been obsessed with secret hiding places during her illness, always tucking treasures away for later. He'd never found this one. Lucy pulled out a small wooden box, one Richard recognized as Emma's jewelry box, the one she'd insisted on keeping by her hospital bed. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a child's drawing in Emma's distinctive style. 2 little girls holding hands under a rainbow. One had yellow hair and wore a hospital gown. The other had dark curls and wore a pink dress. At the bottom, in Emma's careful 6-year-old handwriting, "For Daddy, your other angel is coming. Her name is Lucy, and she needs hugs like I did. Love, Emma." Richard's vision blurred as he stared at the impossible drawing. Emma had died 3 years ago. Lucy had arrived only yesterday. There was no way Emma could have known about Lucy's existence, unless— "How did she know?" he whispered. Lucy tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. "Emma says angels know things. She says she asked God to make sure I found you when Mama went to be with them. She's been practicing being my big sister." Richard sank to his knees, pulling Lucy close as tears he'd held back for 3 years finally broke free. Whether this was grief-induced hallucination, coincidence, or something beyond understanding, it didn't matter. What mattered was the warm, real child in his arms, who somehow carried the essence of the daughter he'd lost. "Emma says she has to go back to the bright place now," Lucy whispered against his shoulder. "But she'll visit sometimes. She says big sisters always watch over little sisters, even from heaven." Through his tears, Richard thought he caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of his vision, a flash of golden hair, a familiar giggle that seemed to whisper goodbye on the wind. When he looked up, Lucy was smiling at something he couldn't see, waving at the empty air. "Thank you, Emma," she said softly. "I'll take good care of Popeye now." As the afternoon light faded from the room, Richard Sterling held his surviving daughter close and finally understood that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the deepest mysteries. But outside, a car was pulling into the driveway. Sarah Chen was back, and this time she had court documents that would determine whether Lucy would stay or disappear forever into the foster system. The real fight was just beginning. Richard watched through his window as Sarah Chen approached with two additional figures, a stern-looking woman in a navy suit and a man carrying what appeared to be an official briefcase. Lucy pressed against his side, her small hand finding his with the instinct of a child who'd learned early that adults could disappear without warning. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah began when he opened the door, "this is Judge Patricia Morrison and family court investigator David Walsh. We need to discuss Lucy's immediate placement." Judge Morrison stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Sterling, while the paternity claims are compelling, this court must consider the child's best interests. You're a single man with no childcare experience, and this child has experienced significant trauma." Richard's jaw tightened. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm her biological father. A father who was unaware of her existence until yesterday," Walsh interjected, consulting his tablet. "Our investigation shows no preparation for child custody, no appropriate bedroom setup, no emergency contacts, no pediatric health care arrangements. This appears to be an impulsive decision based on emotional shock." Behind Richard, Lucy stepped into view. Her presence seemed to shift the entire dynamic in the room. Judge Morrison's stern expression softened slightly as she took in the child's obvious intelligence and surprising composure. "Hello, sweetheart," the judge said gently. "I'm Patricia. We want to make sure you're safe and happy. Can you tell me how you're feeling about staying here?" Lucy looked up at Richard with those steel-grey eyes, then back at the judge. "I'm not scared anymore," she said simply. "Papai doesn't leave people behind. He stayed with Emma until the very end, even when it hurt. Maman told me that." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Your mother told you about Emma?" "Maman said Papai's heart was broken, but still big enough for love. She said some people have hearts that break, but never get smaller." Lucy's voice carried a wisdom that made every adult in the room uncomfortable. She said, "When I was old enough, I should find him and help fix the broken parts." Walsh scribbled notes furiously, but Richard could see doubt creeping into his expression. This wasn't the traumatized, confused child they'd expected to find. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Morrison said carefully, "I'm ordering a full family evaluation. Supervised visits while we process the DNA confirmation and assess your capability for full custody. The child will need to be placed in temporary foster care until—" "No." Richard's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone stared at him. Sarah Chen's hand moved protectively toward Lucy, as if expecting him to become violent. "No," Richard repeated more softly, but with iron resolve. "I lost one daughter to circumstances beyond my control. I won't lose another to bureaucracy. Lucy stays here, or I will use every legal resource at my disposal to ensure this case becomes a public spectacle that reflects poorly on everyone involved." Judge Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening this court, Mr. Sterling?" "I'm making a promise. I have more lawyers on retainer than this county has social workers. I've built businesses, negotiated international deals, and survived losing everything that mattered to me. Don't underestimate what I'm capable of when protecting my family." The silence stretched uncomfortably until Lucy tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Papai," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Emma says you don't have to fight everybody. She says the nice lady judge just wants to make sure little girls are safe." Judge Morrison's breath caught. What did she say? Lucy looked directly at the judge with unsettling directness. "Emma's my big sister. She watches out for me from the bright place. She says you lost a little girl once too, and that's why you're extra careful now." The color drained from Judge Morrison's face. Walsh and Sarah exchanged confused glances, but Richard saw the truth written in the judge's expression. She had lost a child. "How could she possibly—" Judge Morrison began, then stopped herself. Lucy stepped forward and placed her small hand on the judge's arm. Emma says her name was Sophie, and she had red hair like yours. She says Sophie thinks you're doing a good job helping other children, but some children already have their papais waiting for them. Judge Morrison's professional composure cracked completely. She knelt down to Lucy's eye level, her voice shaking. "Sweetheart, how did you know about Sophie?" Lucy tilted her head as if listening. "Emma knows things. She says angels can see the broken hearts that match each other. She says your heart and Papa's heart both have daughter-shaped holes, but sometimes new daughters can help heal old hurt." Richard watched in amazement as this extraordinary child somehow spoke directly to the grief of a woman who held Lucy's entire future in her hands. Whether this was intuition, coincidence, or something beyond explanation, Lucy had just changed the entire trajectory of their case. Judge Morrison stood slowly, tears threatening to spill. "Mr. Sterling, I'm approving temporary custody pending the DNA results and evaluation, but I want weekly check-ins and immediate notification of any concerns." As the officials left, Richard looked down at Lucy with newfound awe. "How did you know about her daughter?" Lucy smiled and pointed toward the staircase, where nothing was visible but shadows and afternoon light. "Emma told me. Big sisters always know how to help." That evening, Richard found himself doing something he hadn't done in 3 years, tucking a little girl into bed. Lucy had insisted on sleeping in the guest room rather than Emma's room, claiming that Emma's room should stay special for visits. "Tell me about Maman," Richard said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I want to know about your life with her." Lucy's eyes grew thoughtful. "Mama worked very hard. She cleaned big houses and always smelled like lemon soap. She taught me Portuguese words and how to make brigadeiros when we had enough chocolate." "Did she ever talk about me?" "Every night before bed. She would show me a picture of you from the newspaper. You were at some fancy party with the angry lady. Mama would say, 'That's your papai, Lucy. He has kind eyes but a sad smile. Someday, when you're older, we'll find him and help make his smile happy again.'" Richard's chest tightened. "She called Catherine the angry lady?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "Maman said the angry lady loved her little girl so much that she forgot how to love anyone else. She said grief makes people do scary things sometimes, but underneath, they're just very, very sad." The wisdom in this 6-year-old's observations astounded Richard. Maria had somehow raised a child who understood adult complexity with remarkable compassion. "There's something else," Lucy said quietly. "Maman had a box of letters she never sent. She wrote to you every year on my birthday. She told you about my first steps, my first words, when I learned to read. She said she kept them in case something happened to her." Richard's breath caught. "Where are these letters now?" "At Maman's apartment. The ladies from the office said they would pack everything up, but I don't know where they put it." Before Richard could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Sterling, this is Maria Santos's landlord. Found a box marked, 'For Richard Sterling, emergency only. Child Services said to contact you. When can you pick it up?'" Richard stared at the message, his hands trembling slightly. Maria had prepared for this day, had left him a roadmap to understanding the daughter he'd never known he had. "We'll get those letters tomorrow," he promised Lucy. "Every single one." Lucy smiled and snuggled deeper into the blankets. "Papai, will you stay until I fall asleep?" Maman always stayed. "Of course." Richard settled more comfortably in the chair beside her bed. "Always." As Lucy's breathing deepened, Richard found himself talking softly about Emma, her laugh, her stubborn streak, her incredible bravery during her illness. He told Lucy about the butterfly garden Emma had planned before she got too sick, about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, about how she used to dance around the kitchen in her pajamas. "She sounds wonderful," Lucy murmured sleepily. "I wish I could have met her before she went to the bright place." Maybe you did, in a way, Richard said softly, thinking about the impossible drawing, the hidden panel, the uncanny connections that defied explanation. Late that night, Richard walked through his house with new eyes. For 3 years, it had been a mausoleum dedicated to grief. But now, with Lucy's laughter echoing in the hallways and her drawings stuck to his refrigerator, it felt like something he'd almost forgotten. A home. In his study, he pulled out his laptop and began typing an email to his lawyer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The custody evaluation, the DNA results, the inevitable media attention when word got out about Richard Sterling's secret daughter. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Richard Sterling fell asleep to the sound of a child's peaceful breathing down the hall, and his dreams were filled not with loss, but with possibility. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, carrying with them revelations that would test everything Richard thought he understood about family, loyalty, and the dangerous lengths people would go to protect the ones they loved. The next morning, Richard and Lucy drove across town to a modest apartment complex where Maria Santos had built a quiet life with the daughter she'd raised alone. The landlord, a kind-faced elderly man named George Henley, met them at the door with a cardboard box that seemed impossibly small to contain 6 years of hidden history. Maria was a good tenant, George said sadly, handing Richard the box. Always on time with rent, never any trouble. She talked about Lucy constantly. That child was her whole world. Inside the apartment, Richard felt the weight of lives lived in shadows. The walls were covered with Lucy's artwork and school achievements. Photos chronicled every milestone. First day of kindergarten, missing teeth, birthday parties with just the two of them. In every image, Maria Santos looked at her daughter with pure adoration. But it was the small shrine in the corner that broke Richard's heart. A framed newspaper photo of him at some charity gala, surrounded by candles and Lucy's baby pictures. Maria had created an altar to the father her daughter couldn't know, keeping his memory alive in their home. "She prayed for you every night," Lucy said softly, noticing where Richard was looking. "She asked God to take care of you because you were taking care of Emma. She said prayers could travel between hearts, even when people couldn't." Richard opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of letters, each one marked with Lucy's age and the year. He opened the first one, dated just after Lucy's birth. "Dear Richard, she has your eyes. When she looks at me, I see the same intensity, the same intelligence that drew me to you during those terrible months when Emma was sick. I know you don't remember me. I was just the cleaning lady who worked extra shifts at the hospital, who sometimes brought you coffee when you'd been sitting by Emma's bed for days. I never meant for this to happen, but you were so broken, so lost in grief, and Catherine was falling apart. One night when Emma was having a good day and you smiled for the first time in weeks, I thought my heart would stop. You were still wearing your wedding ring, still devoted to your dying daughter, but for just a moment, you weren't drowning in sorrow. I won't burden you with details, but our daughter exists because sometimes broken people find comfort in each other, even briefly. I'm naming her Lucy, which means light. She will be the light you gave me, even if you never know it." Richard's vision blurred as he read letter after letter, chronicling Lucy's growth. Maria's English improved over the years, but her love for both Lucy and Richard remained constant. She wrote about Lucy's first word, papai, and how she'd shown her daughter pictures of Richard constantly, making sure Lucy knew she was loved by a father who simply couldn't be there. The letters from Lucy's 3rd year were different, tinged with fear. "Richard, Catherine came to see me today. She knows about Lucy. She offered me money to disappear, to never contact you. When I refused, she showed me immigration papers, threatened to have me deported if I didn't sign documents saying you'd waived all parental rights. I'm scared, Richard, not for me but for Lucy. She asks every day when she can meet her papai. How do I explain that politics and fear are keeping us apart? I've decided to take Catherine's money, not as payment for silence, but as insurance for Lucy's future. If something happens to me, at least she'll have resources. I'm sorry. I hope someday you'll understand that I did this to protect both of our daughters, Lucy from deportation and Emma from the stress of family scandal during her treatment. The final letter was dated just 1 week ago. My dearest Richard, the doctors say I don't have long cancer like Emma. I suppose we're more connected than I ever imagined. Lucy doesn't know yet. I can't bear to frighten her. If you're reading this, it means she found you. She's been practicing the walk to your house for months, memorizing the route. She's braver than both of us combined. Please don't hate Catherine completely. Her love for Emma twisted into something desperate and cruel, but underneath, she was terrified of losing you. Fear makes monsters of good people sometimes. Take care of our light, Richard. Lucy has enough love in her small heart to heal both your broken places and Catherine's guilt. She's the bridge between your two daughters, the living and the angel. All my love, Maria Santos P.S. Lucy insists that Emma visits her in dreams, teaching her things about you that I never told her. I stopped questioning it. Some miracles are too beautiful to doubt. Richard set the letter down with shaking hands. Lucy had been quietly sorting through her old toys, but now she looked up at him with those perceptive eyes. Are you sad about Maman's letters? Not sad, Richard managed. Grateful. She loved you so much, Lucy, and she loved me enough to protect both of our families, even when it cost her everything. Lucy climbed into his lap, something she'd started doing with increasing confidence. Emma says Maman is with her now in the bright place. She says they're friends, and they watch over us together. Richard held his daughter close, surrounded by evidence of a love story he'd never known existed. Maria's quiet devotion, her sacrifice, her careful nurturing of a child who somehow bridged the gap between earthly love and something beyond understanding. But as they prepared to leave, Richard noticed something that chilled him. The apartment had been searched, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. Someone else had been here first, looking for something specific. And on the kitchen counter, barely visible, was a business card that made Richard's blood run cold. Webb and Associates, Private Investigation Services. Someone was building a case against him, and they'd started by rifling through a dead woman's private life. Richard was still processing the implications of the disturbed apartment when his phone rang. Catherine's number appeared on the screen, and for the first time in 3 years, he answered immediately. Richard, we need to talk. Catherine's voice was strained, urgent, not about Lucy, about something else, something dangerous. Where are you? Flying back from California. I'll be at the house by evening. Richard, whatever you do, don't let Lucy out of your sight. And don't trust anyone, not the social workers, not the lawyers. Nobody. The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at the phone in confusion. Catherine had sounded genuinely terrified, but of what? The drive home was quiet, Lucy dozing in her car seat with one of Maria's letters clutched in her small fist. But as they pulled into the driveway, Richard noticed immediately that something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, and his security system's green light was dark. "Stay in the car!" Richard commanded, his military training from decades past kicking in. "Lock the doors, and don't open them for anyone but me." Lucy's eyes went wide, but she nodded solemnly. "Is someone bad in our house?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Richard approached his home with calculated caution. The front door had been expertly picked, professional work, not random vandalism. Inside, the house looked untouched at first glance, but Richard knew his own space. Books were slightly out of place, papers had been shuffled, and his computer was warm despite being shut down when they'd left. In Emma's room, the hidden panel Lucy had shown him hung open, The jewelry box was gone. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have what we came for. The child's claims about supernatural contact are documented now. See you in family court." Ice flowed through Richard's veins as understanding hit him. Someone had been building a case to prove he was an unfit parent, and Lucy's innocent conversations about Emma had been twisted into evidence of psychological instability. They'd stolen Emma's final letter to use against them both. But who was they? The answer came 30 minutes later when David Walsh, the family court investigator, arrived with Judge Morrison and 2 police officers. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Morrison said grimly, "we've received disturbing reports about this child's mental state. Claims that she's communicating with deceased children, evidence of psychological manipulation." "That's ridiculous," Richard interrupted. "Lucy is perfectly healthy, just intuitive and—" "Sir," Walsh cut in, producing a tablet, "we have audio recordings of the child claiming to speak with your deceased daughter, Emma. Our child psychologists are concerned about possible coaching or psychological abuse." Richard's world tilted. "Audio recordings? How could you have—" He stopped, realization dawning. "You bugged my house." "We obtained a warrant based on concerns about the child's welfare," Walsh said smoothly. "The recordings clearly show an adult manipulating a traumatized child into believing she can communicate with the dead." But as Walsh played the recording, Richard's confusion deepened. The voices were Lucy's and Emma's, but Emma's voice was impossible. Technology couldn't fake the specific speech patterns, the vocabulary, the intimate knowledge of family memories that no one else could know. Judge Morrison listened with growing unease. "Mr. Sterling, can you explain how this child knows details about your daughter's illness that aren't in any public records?" Before Richard could answer, Lucy appeared in the doorway. She'd somehow gotten out of the car and entered the house without anyone noticing, a skill that should have been impossible for a 6-year-old. "They stole Emma's letter," Lucy said matter-of-factly, looking directly at Walsh. "But it won't help them, because Emma has something better planned." Walsh's face went pale. "How did she— No one told her about the letter you took from the jewelry box." Lucy tilted her head with that unsettling directness. "Emma knew you would do that. She says you have a daughter named Melissa, who died in a car accident 3 years ago. She says Melissa is sad that you're trying to hurt other fathers because you couldn't save her." The tablet slipped from Walsh's hands, clattering to the floor. Judge Morrison stepped back, her professional composure cracking again. "That's impossible," Walsh whispered. "No one knows about Melissa. How could she—" Lucy walked calmly to Judge Morrison and took her hand. "Emma says the bad men are trying to trick you into taking children away from their papais because they get paid more money when children go into the system. She says they made fake recordings and stole real evidence to build lies." "Fake recordings?" Judge Morrison's voice was sharp with sudden understanding. "Mr. Walsh, are you telling me—" But Walsh was backing toward the door, his face grey with shock and dawning panic. "I need to make some calls. This investigation we need to reassess." "No." The voice came from the doorway, cold and commanding. Catherine Sterling stepped into the house, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. "You're not making any calls, David. You're going to sit down and explain to Judge Morrison exactly who hired you to fabricate evidence against my ex-husband." Richard stared at Catherine in amazement. His ex-wife looked like a completely different person, confident, fierce, almost dangerous. This wasn't the broken woman who'd fled to California. This was someone who'd spent 3 years preparing for war. "I don't know what you're talking about," Walsh stammered, but his eyes were darting toward the windows like a trapped animal. Catherine smiled coldly and nodded to one of her companions, who produced a thick folder. "David Walsh, private investigator for hire, specializes in manufacturing evidence for contentious custody cases. Currently under investigation in 4 states for fraud and perjury." She turned to Judge Morrison, her voice like steel. "Your Honor, My ex-husband isn't the only parent being targeted. There's an entire network of corrupt officials who profit from keeping children in the foster system. They've been watching our family since Emma died, waiting for the right moment to strike. Judge Morrison's face went white as she realized the implications. You're saying this entire custody challenge was fabricated? Not entirely, Catherine said, looking at Lucy with something that might have been regret. Lucy is Richard's daughter, but the concerns about his fitness, the evidence of psychological abuse, all manufactured to steal a child from her biological father and make certain people very rich in the process. As if summoned by the revelation, police sirens began wailing in the distance, growing closer. Catherine had brought more than lawyers. She'd brought justice. But the biggest revelation was yet to come, and it would change everything Richard thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the lengths people would go to protect their families. As police officers led David Walsh away in handcuffs, Catherine faced Richard and Lucy in the living room that had once been their family home. 3 years of separation stretched between them like a chasm, but Lucy seemed oblivious to the adult tensions, settling comfortably on the sofa between her biological parents. "How long have you known?" Richard asked quietly. Catherine's composure finally cracked. "About the corruption? 6 months. About Walsh specifically targeting our family. 3 weeks." She looked at Lucy with haunted eyes. "About Lucy being in danger? This morning when Maria's neighbor called to tell me someone had broken into the apartment before you got there." "Maria's neighbor called you?" Richard's voice was carefully controlled. "Maria gave my number to Mrs. Delgado as an emergency contact. She asked her to call me if anything happened." Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. "Richard, there's something else you need to know, something I've been too ashamed to tell you." Lucy looked up at Catherine with those perceptive eyes. "It's okay," she said softly. "Emma says you're ready to tell the truth now. She says holding secrets makes people sick inside." Catherine's breath caught. "How does she—" "Never mind. I've stopped questioning what this child knows." She turned back to Richard. "I didn't just hide Lucy from you out of grief and jealousy. I was being blackmailed." Richard's blood chilled. "By whom?" "The same people who were just here." "Walsh isn't just a corrupt investigator. He's part of a network that identifies wealthy families going through trauma and systematically destroys them. They knew about Lucy before I did." Catherine stood and walked to the window, her voice growing stronger as she finally unburdened herself of 3 years of secrets. "During Emma's treatment, I was approached by a woman who claimed to be from a support group for families dealing with childhood cancer. She was so sympathetic, so understanding. I told her things I'd never told anyone, including my suspicions about your affair with Maria." "It wasn't an affair," Richard said quietly. "It was 2 broken people finding comfort for one night. I know that now. But then, I was drowning in grief and paranoia. This woman, Sarah, not Chen, a different Sarah, encouraged my fears. She suggested I hire someone to investigate your relationship with Maria, that someone was Walsh." Richard felt the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. They manufactured the evidence of an affair to drive a wedge between us. Worse than that, when Walsh's investigation revealed Lucy's existence, Sarah convinced me that if you found out, you'd leave me and Emma for your real family. And she said the only way to protect Emma's final months was to make the problem disappear. Catherine turned back to face them, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was paying Maria to go away quietly. I didn't know I was funding a human trafficking ring that specializes in stealing children from vulnerable families." The room fell silent except for Lucy's soft humming. She was drawing again, her small hands moving with confidence across the paper. "Show them, Lucy," Catherine said gently. "Show them what Emma told you." Lucy held up her drawing. It was a complex diagram that no 6-year-old should have been able to create. a family tree of sorts, but instead of relatives, it showed connections between corrupt officials, fake social workers, and wealthy families who'd lost custody of their children under suspicious circumstances. At the center of the web was a name that made Richard's blood run cold: Sterling Family Services, a private adoption agency that specialized in difficult cases and charged enormous fees for their services. "Emma says the bad people have been planning this for a long time," Lucy said matter-of-factly. "Ever since you made that speech at the children's hospital about families staying together, they decided you were too dangerous because you might help other papas fight back." Richard remembered that speech, a passionate plea for keeping families intact during medical crises. He'd given it just weeks before Emma's death, when he was raw with grief and desperate to find meaning in his loss. "They've been watching us," he realized, "waiting for the right moment to tear our family apart and profit from it." Catherine nodded. When Maria got sick and Lucy was left vulnerable, they saw their opportunity. Frame you as an unfit parent, steal Lucy into the foster system, and eventually place her with one of their client families for a massive fee. "But you stopped them," Richard said, looking at Catherine with new understanding. "You spent 3 years in California building a case against them." "I spent 3 years drowning in guilt and trying to make amends. When I realized what I'd really done, what I'd enabled, I couldn't just apologize. I had to fix it." Catherine's voice grew fierce. "These people prey on grieving families, Richard. They turn our love for our children against us. I couldn't let them hurt Lucy the way they helped me hurt you." Lucy set down her crayons and looked solemnly at both adults. "Emma says the fighting part is almost over. She says now we get to learn how to be a family again, but different this time. Better." Richard looked from Catherine to Lucy to the drawing that somehow contained information a child couldn't possibly know. Whether divine intervention, impossible coincidence, or something beyond human understanding, Lucy had become the bridge, not just between two sisters, but between a shattered family and their chance at redemption. But even as relief flooded through him, Richard knew their victory was incomplete. The people behind this conspiracy were still out there, and they wouldn't give up easily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new tests of exactly how far a father would go to protect his daughter. The final confrontation was still coming, and it would require every ounce of strength, cunning, and love that Richard Sterling possessed. 3 months later, Richard stood in the renovated butterfly garden behind Sterling Manor, watching Lucy chase monarch butterflies while Catherine documented each species in Emma's memory journal. The corruption network had been dismantled, dozens of children had been reunited with their biological families, and the Sterling family had become unlikely advocates for foster care reform. But the most extraordinary revelation was yet to come. "Papai," Lucy called from beside the memorial fountain they'd built for Emma. "She wants to talk to all of us together. She says it's time for the big secret." Richard and Catherine exchanged glances. Over the months, they'd grown accustomed to Lucy's conversations with Emma, but something in the child's tone suggested this was different, final. Lucy sat cross-legged on the grass, her face serene with concentration. "Emma says she needs to tell you something important before she goes away for good." "Goes away?" Catherine's voice caught. "To the place where big sisters don't have to watch over little sisters anymore," Lucy explained gently. "She says I'm safe now, and she has other children to help." Richard knelt beside Lucy, his heart aching with the impossible hope and loss that had defined their journey. "What does she want to tell us?" Lucy was quiet for a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to whispers only she could hear. When she spoke, her voice carried an otherworldly quality that raised goosebumps on both adults' arms. "She says she picked me for you before she got sick. She prayed every night that God would send you another daughter, who could heal the broken places in your heart. When she met Mamine in the bright place, they made a plan together. Aunt Catherine gasped. Maria and Emma knew each other? Emma says Mama was scared to die alone, so Emma went to help her cross over. That's when they realized they both loved the same man, you, Papai. Emma told Mamai that I would need extra angels watching over me because I was going to have a very important job. Richard's vision blurred as the impossible implications sank in. What job? Lucy smiled with wisdom far beyond her years. To teach grown-ups that love doesn't end when people die. It just changes shape. She stood and placed one small hand on Richard's chest and another on Catherine's. Emma says you both forgot how to love each other because you were so scared of losing more people. But love isn't something you lose, it's something you share. A warm breeze stirred through the garden, carrying the scent of Emma's favorite jasmine flowers. For just a moment, Richard could have sworn he felt a third small hand joining theirs, completing a circle that transcended the boundaries between earth and heaven. There's one more secret, Lucy whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Emma isn't really my sister. She's my guardian angel. God sent her to watch over me until I found my real family, but now that we're all together, her job is finished. Catherine began to cry, deep, healing sobs that carried 3 years of grief, guilt, and desperate love. I'm so sorry, Emma, she whispered to the air. I'm sorry I let fear turn me into someone who hurt people. Lucy looked up at something neither adult could see, nodding as if receiving instructions. Emma says she forgives everything, because that's what sisters do. She says the angry lady is gone now, and Catherine the mommy is back. Mommy! Catherine's breath caught. Lucy took Catherine's hand with perfect trust. Emma says you're not just Papa's Catherine anymore. You're my stepmommy, Catherine, if you want to be. She says Lucy needs someone to teach her about girl things that Papa's don't understand. Richard watched in amazement as the two most important females in his life found each other across the chasm of past mistakes and present grace. Catherine knelt and pulled Lucy into a fierce embrace, and for the first time in 3 years, Richard's family felt complete. The setting sun painted the garden in golden light, and for one perfect moment, Richard could see 4 figures instead of 3, a tall man, 2 women, and a little girl with golden hair, who was slowly fading, but smiling with pure joy. Goodbye, Emma, Richard whispered. Thank you for bringing us home to each other. Lucy waved at the empty air one final time, then turned to her earthly family with eyes that held both childhood innocence and ancient wisdom. Emma says her work here is done, but she left us something to remember her by. She led them to the memorial fountain, where something impossible had appeared. Fresh butterflies were emerging from cocoons that hadn't been there that morning, filling the garden with wings of gold and orange that danced in the dying light. As Richard Sterling held his living daughter while his ex-wife, soon-to-be wife again, planned their future together, he understood at last that some miracles require loss before they reveal their true gift. Emma's death had led to Lucy's birth, Catherine's guilt had led to justice for countless families, and their broken hearts had been reformed into something larger and stronger than before. 6-year-old Lucy Santos Sterling fell asleep that night between her parents, clutching Emma's memory journal and dreaming not of angels, but of earthly adventures with the family who would never let her go. And in the morning, the butterfly garden bloomed with new life, carrying forward the love story that had begun with one man's broken heart and ended with the healing of all the hearts that mattered most.